She assumed he was just another waiter. So, when she handed him a crumpled foreign note with a smug grin, expecting confused silence, he answered, flawlessly. And right there, in front of everyone, he earned a job offer. Outside, Charleston's heat didn't care if your suit cost $3,000 or just $300. It clung to every skin the same way. But inside the Bel Air Club's glass and brick atrium, it was another world, cool air scented with bergamot and citrus, polished surfaces, and quiet whispers that only the wealthy understand. Astrid Penbrook sat under a cream parasol at one of the outdoor tables. CEO of Nexera, a blockchain security firm, she looked like control in human form. Her platinum Nomos watch caught the light with every calculated flick of her silvery blonde bob. Nothing about her was casual, not her posture, not her smile, not even the way she laughed at things that weren't funny. Around her sat a hand-picked circle: tech investors, logistics moguls, a crypto influencer with movie star teeth. They weren't there for brunch. They were there to measure power. Astrid held court like a pro, quick with a joke, sharp with a jab, always one story away from being the misunderstood genius. Then came Keon Ridley. Tray balanced steady on his arm, glasses a little smudged, uniform collar slightly faded. Just another Sunday server, right? Wrong. He'd been working here to focus on his thesis, cutting hours at the university library. He moved with the calm of someone who knew who he was, which made him invisible to people like Astrid. Apologies for the delay, he said, setting her latte down gently. There was a backup on the espresso line. I appreciate your patience. Astrid didn't look up, not right away. She let the pause hang like a performance. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that says, you're beneath me. Well, she said, voice sweet but slicing, good thing you're not coding nuclear launch systems, huh? Polite chuckles. Not at the joke, but at the power play. Keon nodded, turned to walk away. But she stopped him, hand raised like she was brushing away something irritating. Actually, can you make sense of this? She pointed to a wrinkled note on the table. Dieter wrote it, but no one here speaks, whatever this is. Dutch maybe? Then a smirk. If you're so smart, Keon, translate it. Louder laughs. Someone even whispered oof. Keon looked at the note. No flinch. No frown. Of course, he said, steady as ever. He read it silently first, then aloud in perfect Dutch. Dieter, the man who wrote it, snapped upright in surprise. Then came the English translation, followed by a calm correction. The verb should be begeligen, not leiden, given the contract's cross-border context. No arrogance. No drama. Just truth. The table fell silent. Dieter looked impressed. Astrid blinked, caught off guard. Keon simply placed the note back on the table, nodded politely and walked away, unbothered as if nothing had happened. But something had. Astrid lifted her latte. She didn't drink it, just held it tighter. The others glanced between her and Keon's fading silhouette. She broke the silence. I like when people surprise me, she said, forcing a laugh. But no one laughed back. Her smile was still there, but something had tightened in her voice. She stirred the foam of her latte like she was brushing off a bad thought. Just a wrinkle in her blouse, nothing more. Only Dieter responded. That young man, he said, his Belgian accent soft but certain. He knows his syntax. That level of precision, rare even for native speakers. Astrid forced a smile, sharp behind her teeth. Impressive memory, for a waiter, she said, tossing her sunglasses on the table with a little clack. But if you're working brunch in Charleston, maybe you're not that smart after all. No one laughed. Keon was out of sight now, but somehow his absence filled the space more than his presence ever had. Astrid glanced at her Rolex. She needed to pivot, to take control back. Elbows on the table, she leaned in. Let's shift gears, she said. What's everyone's take on the Florida data legislation? We're restructuring in Tallahassee and, sorry. Dieter interrupted politely, raising his hand. What was the name of the university again? The one he mentioned. Lila from Nova North Ventures answered. Clark Atlanta. I think. They've been putting out some good work lately. Astrid exhaled just loud enough to be heard. Sure. And I'm sure their brunch etiquette class is world class. That got a few chuckles, but softer now. Nervous. Lila didn't laugh. She looked toward the kitchen. Astrid saw that glance. And suddenly her armor didn't feel as impenetrable. She lifted her mimosa, trying to reclaim the room. Let's not pretend we're all suddenly fascinated with a part-time waiter, she said with a brittle edge. This is a business brunch, not a resume fair. But her words, they didn't settle the room like they used to. Back in the kitchen, Keon exhaled near the prep station. His coworker Santiago looked up from the sink. You good? Keon shrugged. Didn't think I'd be tested on Dutch syntax over lattes. Santiago laughed. Man, you just made Astrid Penbrook look like she had to Google how to spell her own name. Keon smiled faintly. Wasn't trying to embarrass her. Exactly, Santiago said. That's what made it sting. Keon wiped his glasses, his gaze settling on the tiled floor. You ever feel like some people walk into a room already convinced they're above you? Santiago nodded slowly. Yeah, and sometimes they are. But sometimes, they're just louder, hoping nobody notices they don't know what they're talking about. Meanwhile, back at the table, Dieter was texting. Lila was mentally drafting an email to a recruiter she knew. Astrid was counting, recalculating the room, the mood, the damage. But if she thought the moment had passed, she was wrong. When Keon returned with a tray, everything had shifted. Voices were softer. Postures leaned in. The vibe, broken. He laid down 2 plates. Eggs Florentine. Seared salmon. Then turned with a third. Astrid stopped him mid-motion. Wait a second. Keon paused, plate still in hand. His eyes met hers, calm, unflinching. What's your name again? Her tone was syrupy now, overly warm. Keon, he said. Keon Ridley. Right. You're doing your master's. Yes. And still working tables? That's ambitious. He set the plate down gently. I do what I need to. And what exactly are you studying? Computational linguistics. Wow, she chuckled. What are you going to do, write code in French? Keon didn't flinch. Astrid smiled wider, but her voice dipped, calculated now. See, some people think knowledge is about degrees and big words. But context matters too. Like when to speak, when to stay silent, when to know your place. The silence that followed was raw. Dieter's brow furrowed. Lila stared at her napkin. Another guest hid behind his water glass. Keon stood steady. I understand context, he said. Astrid leaned closer, dropped her voice to a knife's edge. Then maybe next time, don't flex your vocabulary over coffee. Keon looked her dead in the eye. If answering your question respectfully is what you call flexing, he said, then maybe you weren't asking a real question. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I don't speak to impress. I speak to clarify. You asked me to translate. I did. You don't have to like the answer. And with that he moved on. The silence he left behind? Deafening. Astrid stared after him, unsure if she'd just been challenged or erased. Dieter spoke next. He didn't speak out of turn. You asked. I know what I said, Astrid muttered. No one's saying you didn't, Lila replied gently, placing her napkin down. Keon, meanwhile, helped an older couple cut their scones. He moved with practiced ease, but his mind was still at that table. In the kitchen, Santiago asked, What happened? Keon replied quietly. She told me to know my place. Santiago winced. I knew what this job was, Keon said. But I didn't know I'd have to prove myself every time I opened my mouth. Outside, Astrid tapped her spoon, 3 sharp clicks. She thinks he made her look foolish, Lila whispered. She made herself look that way, someone replied. But the shock wasn't what Keon had said. It was what came next. Dieter stood up. I think I'll speak to him. Astrid forced a smile. Be my guest. But her voice cracked just slightly. Dieter caught Keon by the kitchen door. Pardon me, he said. You mentioned Clark Atlanta? Yes. Final semester, Keon replied. That paper, on multilingual tokenization from Dr. Rourke's lab, was that yours? Keon blinked. You've read it? I read everything that connects language and fintech, Dieter smiled. That section on cross-lingual accuracy? Sure. You should know that. Keon didn't shift, but his eyes lit in a way they hadn't before. Would you be free Monday? Our Atlanta office could use someone like you. Not for translation, for systems thinking. Keon hesitated. You serious? I don't waste time, Dieter said. You gave me more in one answer than I've heard in days. Keon pulled out a notepad. Scribbled his number. I'd be honored. Dieter folded the note carefully into his wallet. You should be leading meetings, not serving them. Back at the table, Astrid watched silently. Dieter sat back down. Come. Cool. Interesting conversation, Astrid said. Very, Dieter replied. Keon moved lighter now. Not proud, just whole. Santiago raised a brow. What was that? Keon smiled. He offered me a meeting. Santiago let out a low whistle. You just flipped the whole table and didn't raise your voice. Sometimes, Keon said, Truth is enough. On the patio, a VC leaned toward Astrid. He's got something, that guy. Kinda wild how sharp he is. Astrid's smile froze. Lila joined in. You ever wonder how many people we overlook because of where they stand or what they wear? Astrid scoffed. He served coffee. He didn't cure cancer. No, Lila said quietly. But today, he carried himself better than anyone else at this table. And just like that, the narrative slipped from Astrid's hands. Across the patio, small conversations continued. But the focus, subtle quiet, had shifted. Keon had become the one they remembered. Not for spectacle, but for clarity. If you ever want to intern somewhere that values clarity and tact, Dita said quietly, email me, Jich. He folded the note and tucked it into Keon's apron. Santiago patted him on the shoulder, half in awe. Never seen a room bend around one person like that. Keon shook his head. I didn't bend anything. Santiago chuckled. Exactly. That's why it worked. Back outside, Astrid was doing math in her head. She was used to being the center of gravity. When she spoke, people leaned in. When she cracked a joke, they laughed, even when it wasn't funny. That's how she built Nexera, from a shared desk to a $320 million valuation. But now no one was laughing. No one was looking her way. Can we please talk about the new Fed guidelines? She snapped. Someone mumbled, send it in the Slack. Silence. Astrid stood abruptly. Excuse me. I need a moment. Her heels struck the stone path harder than usual as she walked away. Near the valet, her assistant looked up. You okay? Astrid kept her sunglasses on. I need everything on that waiter. His last name? I think it's Ridley. Keon Ridley. Astrid's jaw tightened. Find his resume. LinkedIn. Anything. Are you thinking of offering him something? I'm thinking, she said coldly, about controlling the story before it controls me. The assistant nodded, already scrolling. But even as she walked back, something gnawed at her. Astrid had spent years crafting presents, and suddenly she was on the outside of someone else's moment. Keon, meanwhile, sat on a plastic crate near the back hall, sipping lukewarm water. His heart was still buzzing. A group chat from his cohort popped up, someone venting about the syntax midterm. He smiled faintly but didn't reply. This job was supposed to be temporary, rent, books, and those hidden expenses no one talks about. Like headphones that kept his mind intact. Or bus fare when his car finally gave up. Clark Atlanta hadn't been plan A, but it turned out to be the plan. The professors pushed him. They didn't just grade, they challenged. And Keon rose to it. He'd built tools that mattered, a language recognition model for refugee dialects, a plugin that translated commands for ESL students in underfunded schools. But none of that showed when he set a plate down. People saw the apron, the slacks, the tired shoes. Most days he didn't mind. Until someone like Astrid reminded him. Not with insults but with that tone. That mocking curiosity wrapped in polite sarcasm. It wore at you quietly. Like a leak behind a wall. Keon rubbed his eyes and stood. Back on the floor, Santiago handed him a plate. Table 10 asked for you. Keon raised a brow. Why? Same order. Said they forgot to tip and want to fix that. Keon blinked. That's a first. You're on a roll today, Santiago grinned. At table 10, a woman handed him a folded bill. You handled yourself with more grace than I ever could, she said softly. Thank you, Keon replied. That means a lot. As he turned, he caught Astrid watching. Her elbow on the table. Her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she might speak. She didn't. She just raised her glass and took a sip. In her mind she replayed it all, the jab. The silence. The note translated with ease. The power slipping too quickly to stop. It doesn't matter, she told herself. No cameras. No headlines. But something in her knew. It wasn't just that Keon made her look small. It was that he didn't try to. That night, after the chairs were stacked, Keon walked home, 10 blocks through Avondale. He passed the mural by the laundromat. The flickering gas station sign. Same city. But he felt different. Not triumphant. Just grounded. Sometimes real power is refusing to shrink just because someone expects you to. And while Keon finally caught his breath, Astrid was already plotting her next move. Monday arrived fast. Keon sat in the campus library, laptop humming, surrounded by syntax theory. His phone buzzed. Subject, follow-up from brunch, Charleston from Dita Vance. Keon, I meant what I said. Your insight was sharp and your presence even sharper. Let's meet Friday, noon. Informal, but it could lead somewhere bigger. Hope to see you there. Keon read it twice, then once more. He didn't forward it, didn't screenshot it. He just sat with it. Across town, Astrid stood in a glass-walled conference room. Quarterly reports behind her. KPIs on the board. But her focus. LinkedIn. Keon Ridley. Plain headshot. MA candidate, computational linguistics. Clark, Atlanta. 3 research jobs. A fellowship. Bel Air Club, service associate. She skimmed. No fluff. No blog. Just work. She called Lillian Groves, her PR lead. Need background support, Astrid said. Name's Keon Ridley. Lillian paused. Wait, the brunch thing? Astrid stayed silent. Lila's been telling everyone, Lillian continued. Nova North folks think he's a natural speaker. Might get scouted for a pitch event. Astrid closed her eyes. Just flag anything I should know. Sure, Lillian said. But Astrid, maybe let it go. This may not be the headline you think it is. Click. Back in the library, Keon replied with a simple, confirmed. Then leaned back. Santiago had already texted, let me know if I gotta start calling you boss. It wasn't a job. Not yet. But it was a door. And Keon was done waiting in hallways. That afternoon he stopped by Bel Air Club to collect his paycheck. Judith, the manager, met him at the door. Keon, she said with a smile, we've been hearing things. He froze. About how you handled a tough guest, she clarified. 3 emails. Compliments. Never had that happen before. Really? She nodded. You made an impression. People are talking about you in rooms you haven't even stepped into yet. He smiled, thanked her, and stepped out into the sun. Nothing around him looked different, but everything inside did. He didn't feel like the guy who brought the latte anymore. He felt like the one people remembered. But not everyone was ready to accept that shift. Tuesday morning brought a cold snap, but Astrid still arrived at her 9 a.m. panel in a sleeveless navy dress. Coat draped loosely. Her signature look. She was scheduled to speak on adaptive leadership. But as she approached the registration table, the volunteer handed her name badge over. Without a smile. No warmth. No recognition. Not even a simple thank you. Miss Penbrook. Inside the convention hall, the air hummed with murmurs and movement. Her panel wasn't for another 30 minutes, but the room was already alive. Coffee cups clinked. Voices bounced softly. Near the refreshments, her name surfaced, just not the way she was used to. That waiter guy, Keon something? Yeah, Keon Ridley. He just got tapped to consult for Vens Global. You're kidding? From that brunch? Nope. Dead serious. Nova North's already talking about putting him on their radar. Astrid didn't stop walking. But her stride lost its sharpness. At the stage area, she set down her materials. Charisse Linton, the moderator from Phoenix, greeted her. Morning, Astrid. Hey, Charisse. They shook hands. But something was off. Charisse's smile didn't reach her eyes. Just a heads up, she said gently, there may be a question or two about the brunch. Astrid blinked. Excuse me? You haven't seen it? Charisse asked, careful. It's been on Twitter since last night. Someone recorded the part where he corrected your Dutch. It's got over 200K views. Astrid's stomach turned. No one was recording. Well, they were. She opened her phone, notifications stacked like bricks. Mentions. DMs? Subject lines like, everything okay? Or, saw the clip. One tweet stuck out, when the waiter is the smartest person at the table. Another, this is why you treat everyone with respect. Because you never know who's across from you. She shut the screen. Art. The panel went on. She spoke clearly, flawlessly. But the air had changed. Polite applause. No spark. Afterward, a veteran VC approached. Good talk, he said. Then pausing, but you know, sometimes we forget to look around before speaking. The smart ones? They learn from it. Astrid smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes either. Back at her hotel, she sat on the bed, heels still on. Outside, Charleston moved as if nothing had changed. But for her, everything had. She wasn't canceled. Not publicly. But she'd been reduced. And for someone like her, that was worse. Across town, in a modest office by Clark Atlanta's campus, Keon sat in a quiet meeting with 2 reps from Vens Global. No bragging. No talk of brunch. Just numbers, tech, systems, and respect. He walked past a billboard afterward, caught his reflection in the glare. And for the first time in a long time, he saw someone who didn't need permission to be taken seriously. But for every door that opens, someone is still standing behind the one that just closed. And Astrid wasn't done staring at hers. 3 weeks passed. No press. No apology. Just quiet recalibration. Keon had started part-time remote work with Vens, refining language models, optimizing multilingual search. Nothing flashy. But every meeting felt different. People asked, then listened. He hadn't quit the Bel Air Club yet. Not because he had to stay, but because he wanted to leave right. 2 weeks' notice. Proper farewell. He trained the new guy himself. Then one morning, a new email. Subject, offer letter, Vens Global full-time. Hybrid. Salary, triple what he made last year. He stood by his window. No cheering. Just silence. And a door finally opened wide enough to walk through without shrinking. Up in Nexarus. Glass Tower, Astrid sat at her desk. The draft on her screen was titled, Lessons in Listening, Why Leadership Begins with Humility. Ghost-written. Crisp. Sanitized. She hated the tone, but understood why it had to exist. The brunch never trended, but it traveled. Whispers in meetings. Sideline remarks. Let's avoid founders who forget respect. She wasn't named. She didn't need to be. The part that haunted her wasn't the exposure, it was the loss of control. She'd built her identity on polish, precision, presence, and one quiet correction from a kid with smudged glasses had shown people something she couldn't unshow. She didn't hate Keon. Not exactly. She hated that he hadn't fought. He hadn't jabbed back. He hadn't tried to embarrass her. He just told the truth and let it stand. And that she couldn't spin. Friday afternoon. Avondale. Keon handed in his apron. Judith gave him a handwritten card and a $50 restaurant voucher. You made people feel seen, she said. They're still talking about it. Santiago clapped him on the back. Go buy a shirt with buttons, boss man. Keon smiled. Hugged him. Promised to stay in touch. Walking home, he passed the mural again. A jazz saxophonist. Head tilted, eyes closed mid-note. Above it, spray-painted words. They'll hear you, even if they pretend not to. He stood there, just breathing. That night, he opened his laptop, accepted the offer, and closed the tab. No fireworks. Just forward. Across the city, Astrid sat alone. Blank email draft. Cursor blinking. She typed, Keon, I've been thinking about what happened. Backspaced. Typed again. Deleted. Maybe someday she'd send it. For now, the lesson was hers to carry. Sometimes the people we ignore become the ones we answer to. Some stories end in spotlight. Applause. Headlines. But Keon's didn't need any of that. It ended the way real change does, quietly. With dignity. In rooms people didn't expect him to be in. At tables where no one had saved him a seat, but where his words made people stop and think. By month's end, he moved into a small townhouse near the park. Nothing fancy. Worn carpet. Bathroom that needed tiles. But sunlight poured in, and peace came with it. He'd started mentoring undergrads, some juggling side jobs just like he had. And to one he said, be ready. People will measure you by the wrong scale. Don't waste your life shrinking to fit it. As for Astrid, she carried on. Panels, summits, polished photos. But she noticed, laughter in meetings came slower. Respect, once given freely, now waited. She hadn't been ruined, but she'd been marked. Quietly. Permanently. One night, scrolling LinkedIn, she saw Keon's update, multilingual NLP analyst, Vens Global. Focused on bridging the gap between real people and the systems that serve them. Still learning. Always listening. No sarcasm. No mention of her. Just purpose. He had moved on. She hadn't. And that was the wound. Somewhere near campus, Keon helped a friend practice a tech pitch. He wasn't the one presenting. He just liked helping others shine. That had always been the goal. Show up. Stay ready. Stay real. He didn't need revenge. He believed in progress. And sometimes, the strongest power isn't loud. It's the kind that doesn't flinch when someone talks over you. It's the kind that doesn't back down just to keep others comfortable. Because respect? You don't demand it. You show it. And eventually, it decides everything. So maybe next time someone brings your coffee a little late, ask their name. Look them in the eye. Treat them like they matter. Because they just might be carrying more than a tray. Thanks for listening to the full story. If it moved you even a little, consider subscribing. We've got more real human stories coming. Stories about quiet strength, unseen brilliance, and the dignity found in the small moments that say everything. Until next time, treat people like they matter. Even when no one's watching. especially then.